Hey, did you know that males on the autism spectrum often develop a special interest in facts rather than fiction? But females on the autism spectrum often develop a special interest in fiction rather than facts. Yeah. And by the way, that's Watson right there? No, he's not dead. Because those individuals with autism spectrum disorder know that they're different and have difficulty relating to others, they often suffer from acute or chronic depression. Others can have anger or rage symptoms out of frustration for being out of place. And not surprising, there's been numerous reports of suicide and suicide attempts among people with autism spectrum disorder. So, if you know somebody on the autism spectrum who happens to be depressed and or anxious, I don't know, maybe just extend a little grace and mercy. Just saying. At times it can be challenging not to take things personally in a neurodiverse marriage, and this can lead to a range of negative emotions and anxiety. So it's crucial to keep in mind that your spouse's words and actions are often influenced by their own issues, insecurities, and biases, rather than being a true reflection of your worth or abilities. If you're in a lot of pain with your spouse, then you're not seeing that person clearly. Instead, you're seeing your version of that person. If you were to see your spouse as he or she actually is, you would experience only love and appreciation. But your perception is distorted, and so you only see selected fragments of the whole. Okay, a question from one of my YouTubers. How can you get your ASD partner to be more emotional or sentimental? That's like an ASD spouse asking me, how can I get my neurotypical wife to be less emotional and more logical? It's a brain wiring thing. If he has ASD level 1, he's going to have this little thing called alexithymia, which is emotions blindness. And so that means he's not going to be so emotional. He's going to be more logical. He's not going to be high in social and emotional intelligence, but he'll be high in logical intelligence. So the answer to the question is, how can you get your ASD partner to be more emotional or sentimental? That's like asking me, how can I get my ASD spouse to not have autism? Okay, another question from one of my YouTubers. So how would an AS partner know they were in love if they have alexithymia? Well, with alexithymia, they are going to kind of be out of touch with their emotions somewhat, and they're not going to have an emotions vocabulary, but that doesn't mean they don't have any emotions. They certainly do experience emotions, but those emotions tend to be very strong before they experience them. So one of the emotions that they do experience and they do know that they're having would be anger. But even in that case, sometimes it's after they've exploded and, you know, they've punched a hole in the drywall. Well, I guess I was angry. But that's a good question, because some people with alexithymia confuse love with a newfound yet temporary special interest. If you're experiencing a lot of stress in your neurodiverse marriage, remind yourself that stress is far more attitudinal than situational. In other words, change your attitude and you'll change your situation. Okay, quick message to autistic people out there. You have a problem with social skills, you have a problem with emotional intelligence, you may have alexithymia, you have executive function deficits, you have anxiety, you have sensory sensitivities, you have weak central coherence, problems with prediction, you have a hard time getting along with your neurotypical spouse, you probably were labeled as a problem child by parents, as a problem student by teachers, you've been on the receiving end of disapproval your entire life. Guess what? Not your fault. I said, not your fault. You didn't sign up for autism. Hey, quick message to neurotypical wives out there. You try too hard sometimes. Yeah, you try too hard sometimes. Or maybe you try too hard most of the time. So, listen. Sometimes less work is better work. Yeah, just saying. Hey, did you know it's very common for people on the autism spectrum to become hypervigilant, tense, and distractible in sensory stimulating environments, unsure when the next painful sensory experience will occur? Yeah. So, if you are around someone on the autism spectrum and they're overwhelmed due to sensory overload, maybe extend a little grace and mercy in that moment. Yeah, just saying. quick message to neurotypical wives. If your husband has ASD, just know that he can go all year without talking about feelings. And he can go all year without feeling compelled to socialize, with the exception of collaborating with coworkers on tasks of a non-emotional nature. That's because if he has ASD, he's going to have this little thing called alexithymia, which is emotions blindness. And he's going to have this little thing called theory of mind deficits. Yeah. So, just in case you didn't know, he's not interested in talking about emotions. He's not interested in attending a 3-hour family get-together. A quick message to neurodiverse couples. You made up a story about who your spouse is. Now, if it's a healthy story, then stick with it. If it's an unhealthy story that's causing you a bunch of emotional pain, then get a new one. So if you're tempted to idealize your spouse on one end of the spectrum or fight with your spouse on the other end of the spectrum, remember that no person has the power to save you or hurt you. Only you can save yourself or hurt yourself. A lot of times what happens in a neurodiverse marriage is the ASD spouse is very unemotional, doesn't understand emotions, doesn't display emotions, doesn't really connect at a deep emotional level. And so the neurotypical spouse will sometimes, perhaps unintentionally and perhaps unconsciously, try to provoke the ASD spouse, try to bait the ASD spouse. In other words, some attention, even if it's negative attention, is better than no attention, and some emotional expression from this ASD spouse is better than no emotional expression. Another comment from one of my YouTubers. But the end result is the same. If someone acts insensitive and selfish, they are insensitive and selfish. Lipstick on a pig. I got news for you, lipstick on a pig. They're not acting. They're exhibiting traits of the disorder. Yeah, there's no acting going on. Hey guys, this is Mark, and I got a question from a man on the autism spectrum, and he says, I'm not sure if I feel love or not. I think I do, but I'm just not sure. Well, just know that for all of you guys out there with ASD, doesn't matter whether you have ASD or not, doesn't matter whether you're male or female, love is your natural state in the absence of fear. Love is your natural state in the absence of fear. Now, if you are in some form of fear, for example, toxic guilt, toxic shame, regrets about the past, worries about the future, feeling sorry for yourself, feeling vindictive, and so on, then love cannot coincide with those states of mind. So eliminate the fears as much as possible, and when you're in a non-fearful state, you are by default in your natural state of love. Okay, another quick question from one of my YouTubers. Should I tell him he's ASD? Only if you're a diagnostician and you've assessed him and you know he has ASD. If you go in there and tell him he has ASD when you don't know for sure, just know that's going to start a fight. But you can do a little research, come up with the strengths associated with ASD, also come up with a few of the challenges associated with ASD that he also happens to exhibit, some of those same behaviors, some of those traits. Then your message can go like this. Instead of, you have ASD, it can be, well, there's this condition where there's these strengths, and you list those, and there's also these challenges, and you list those. These are traits of ASD that he also exhibits. And you can say, that's interesting that the person would have these challenges but have all of these strengths too. And you just kind of plant the seed. Okay, another comment from one of my YouTubers. Mark, this is what we've been told by NT therapists for the last 30 years. Talk about your feelings. I feel such and such. Yeah, you can talk about your feelings. I'm not sure you're going to problem solve by talking about feelings. Your feelings are important. You need to talk to somebody about your feelings. But if you have an ASD spouse, you have a spouse who has alexithymia, which is emotions blindness, which he's going to be out of touch with his feelings and your feelings. So to talk about feelings is to use a foreign language. Okay, another quick question from one of my YouTubers, and she asks, what exactly is gaslighting? The person who gaslights is really good at, and sometimes they're doing this at an unconscious level, good at convincing you that your opinion is wrong, that there's no basis in reality for your opinion or your perspective on the matter in question or matters, that it's a stupid opinion, therefore you're stupid and you should know better. So it's categorically telling you that not only are you wrong, but you're dumb and you should know better. So there's a shaming factor involved there. So now the person on the receiving end of gaslighting starts to doubt her own sanity, starts to doubt her own ability to make assessments of reality, and so on. Hey, did you know that people on the autism spectrum collect facts and figures about a specific topic and they become an expert in that area? And they have a level of expertise that exceeds the general population by a long shot. So, who do you know on the autism spectrum, whether it's a family member, friend, spouse, and what is their special interest that they're really, really, really good at? Hey, did you know that people on the autism spectrum experience physical and emotional exhaustion from socializing? Yeah. So the next time you want to drag somebody that you know who's on the autism spectrum to a 3-hour dinner party, for example, maybe just rethink that thing. Hey guys, this is Mark, and I want to talk about what might be the number one thing that contributes to resentment in your neurodiverse marriage. We're going to call it low performance. For example, one partner consistently fails to fulfill their responsibilities or fails to contribute equally, or one partner consistently puts in more effort to express love and affection while the other remains passive, or one partner perceives an imbalance in responsibilities, decision-making power, or emotional investment. Low performance may be the number one thing that leads to resentment. Hey, did you know that people on the autism spectrum have a hard time reading the messages in someone's eyes? Yeah. Quick message to guys on the autism spectrum. You've heard of fighting for things that are important to you, right? Your wife is fighting because you're important to her, but you're missing the second part. You just view it as fighting. So autism is no respecter of persons any more than Hurricane Ian was a respecter of people in Fort Myers Beach, Florida, for example. It doesn't respect the person who has autism. It doesn't respect the person who's married to the person who has autism. It's been around for a long time, allegedly a few hundred years, and a lot of people suspect that it's been around since day one. So it's not going anywhere, not anytime soon. It is what it is. Don't take it personally any more than you would take Hurricane Ian personally. Well, I can't believe that hurricane just happened to tear down my house. I'm taking that as a personal affront. Hurricane wasn't concerned about you, wasn't thinking about you. It had nothing to do with you. Now, having said that, you can still feel the pain associated with being involved in the event, on the receiving end of maybe a meltdown from your autistic husband, on the receiving end of storms that tear up your house. So I'm not saying you're not affected by it, but I am saying that it is something that exists in the universe, and you can either fight it or accept it. But if you fight it, it always wins. So, message to neurodiverse couples out there. If your spouse is complaining about something that you said or did, and then you complain about the fact that they're complaining, you're no better than they are. If your spouse is yelling or giving you the silent treatment, and then you get upset and yell back or give them the silent treatment, you're no better than they are. If your spouse is having a temper tantrum, and then you get upset and have a tantrum because they're having a tantrum, you're no better than they are. So why don't you be the one that can regulate his or her emotions? Why don't you be the more mature one? So if you're resentful just because your spouse is resentful, you're in the same rabbit hole that he or she is in. And if you're angry because your spouse is angry, you're in the same rabbit hole that he or she is in. And if you're offended because your spouse is offended, same rabbit hole. Maybe don't follow that person down that rabbit hole. So one thing I hear from NT wives a lot, they go, well, it just seems so hopeless. You know, where's the hope? If you're talking about changing his behavior, you're right, it is hopeless. You should give up hope in that area. Yeah, give up hope trying to change him. That is hopeless. But there is hope in you changing your reaction to his behavior. So changing his behavior, that's hopeless. Changing your reaction to his behavior, there's all kinds of hope there. And for those NT wives that are still in denial, that someday he'll get it, someday he'll do better, someday he'll try harder, someday we'll be happy again. There's got to be hope there somewhere. So for those of you who still think that way, then do yourself a favor, get a calendar, get next year's calendar, and mark a year from today. So for example, if today is December 1st of 2022, which it's not, but then get a 2023 calendar, and on December 1st, write on the calendar, reality check. Okay? A year from now, on a calendar, write a little note to self, do a reality check. And the reality check is this: how much was I able to change his behavior over the course of the last year? Now, when your answer is, I didn't accomplish anything, in fact, my efforts made a bad problem worse, then maybe you'll start giving up hope of trying to change his behavior and find hope in changing your reaction to his behavior. Okay, so if your spouse does or says something that you download as being disrespectful, it hurts. We'll call it hurtful. But when you replay the event, now you're hurting you. Okay, so when you replay the original thing that happened once, but you've replayed it 15 times, it feels like it's happened 15 times, and then you blame your spouse for doing it to you for 15 times when it was only once. So yeah, we'll call the original event hurtful. Shouldn't have happened, it was wrong. But your replays, it's not the other person doing it to you then, now you're doing it to yourself. This is going to sound sarcastic. It's not meant to be. I'm actually telling you the truth. How does an ASD spouse show his love for his NT wife? He does things for her. How does the NT wife show her love for her autistic husband? She tries to fix him because she cares about the relationship. So he can fix the dishwasher, and for example, and that's how he shows his love. And she shows her love by saying, yeah, okay, well, thanks for fixing the dishwasher, and I'm going to continue to try to fix you because I care about you. The problem is he can always fix the dishwasher. You can never fix him. So I get this comment from NT wives a lot, and they say, well, my husband doesn't recognize he has anxiety. He says he doesn't have anxiety. Well, if he has ASD level 1, how is he going to know if he has anxiety? Because he's going to have some version of alexithymia, which means he's out of touch with his emotions. And if you've been anxious your entire life, how would you know whether you're anxious or not? It's like growing up in a dark room and you've lived in there for 40 years, and then somebody comes along and says, wow, your room is very dark. And you go, no, it's not dark. It's always been this way. This is familiar. This is how it's always been. Therefore, it must be normal. So he's not going to know whether he has anxiety or not. What does the autistic spouse want more than anything? To be given a word of appreciation from his NT spouse every once in a while to confirm that he's doing something right. What does the NT spouse want more than anything? For her autistic spouse to just spend time with her, not necessarily do anything for her per se. Quick message to the neurodiverse couples out there. Your complaining has gotten you nowhere. Nowhere. Hey guys, this is Mark, and I have a message to the neurodiverse couples out there. And I'm not referring to one particular spouse. This is for the NT spouse and the ASD spouse both. Chronic anger is resentment. That's point number 1. Chronic anger is resentment. Point number 2, chronic anger and resentment will cause physical health problems. Chronic anger and resentment will cause cancer in some cases, autoimmune disease, heart disease, high blood pressure, brain fog, and so on. That's point number 2. Point number 3 is really a question. And I want you to ask yourself, you're going to compare you to your spouse, who is having the most physical health problems? You or the other party? And who seems to be the most resentful? And is the one who's having the most health problems also the one who's possibly the most resentful? Do some soul searching on that. You simply have to find some good in your spouse. I don't care how much this person has been misbehaving according to you, but he's got to be, or she has got to be doing something right. So you've got to find some good in your spouse somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to be very miserable. Tip for neurodiverse couples: you have wasted 80% of your time and energy trying to control the things you can't control. Now, there was 20% that you did spend time and energy on that you did control. But if you will stop wasting that 80% and apply a full 100% to the things that you can control, you'll be able to control them much more quickly and much more efficiently. You can fight or you can heal, but you can't do both at the same time. You can fight or you can heal both emotionally and physically, but you cannot do both at the same time. It's just that black and white. There is no gray area. If there's a lot of fighting, no healing. Moderate amounts of fighting, no healing. Just a little bit amount of fighting, no healing. Just thinking about fighting, we're not actually fighting, I'm just thinking about it, no healing. Why? Because any of the above will cause your body to excrete a little bit of cortisol and adrenaline, which keeps you in some version of fight or flight, which means you're now not engaging your parasympathetic nervous system, and you can only heal when your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged. So, fight to one degree or another, or think about fighting, or heal. One of the two, you can't do both. Okay, another comment from one of my YouTubers. This is the NT wife, and she states, "I just want to know my husband is trying. If he fails, that's okay." That's a great comment. And to the other NT wives that may be watching this video, sometimes it would be very appropriate and even healthy for the marriage if you would reward effort. Reward effort, regardless of the end result. And to the ASD spouses out there, you have to put forth some effort, right? If you fail, fine. That's not a mistake. That's just a learning process. So, great comment. Thank you. NTs, reward effort every once in a while. Question: why would a healthy woman want to be disrespected and emotionally minimized to be with someone with issues? She wouldn't. And so maybe stop viewing autistic traits as disrespect and emotional minimization. Another question: are the traits of ASD calling your wife vile names, like a schoolyard bully? I would say that what's going on there is the result of high anxiety. So when he's calling you names and being bullyish, just know that his brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. He's in fight or flight mode. He's feeling intimidated and fearful. And his calling you names and being bullyish is a defense mechanism against anxiety. It's a way, a very dysfunctional way, to discharge pent-up energy, which is anxiety. So in those moments where he's being basically emotionally abusive, you need to let him know that I'm not going to tolerate being on the receiving end of emotional abuse. I'll be over there at the other end of the house, and when you calm down, we can have a discussion or talk about what's going on. And you need to let him know ahead of time that whenever you start calling me names, I'm going to leave. Question: is it possible that a person with ASD and a person with severe obsessive compulsive personality disorder in a relationship could trigger each other? That would be likely, because both parties are going to have some perfectionism. Both parties are going to have some obsessive compulsive tendencies. Both parties are going to need high levels of structure, which is going to appear as severe rigidity, and that's the short list. So absolutely can be a trigger for both parties. Question: do all individuals with autism have alexithymia? It has been my experience that all people with autism have some degree of alexithymia. some worse than others. But not everybody with alexithymia has autism. There's a lot of people that are alexithymic that have other disorders other than ASD level 1. But even if the individual is alexithymic, that doesn't mean they're doomed. There's this neuroplasticity. In other words, your brain can learn new things. So that includes developing an emotional vocabulary, developing some emotional literacy, understanding, or at least becoming better at understanding your emotions and the emotions of others. So there is some hope that those who are alexithymic can develop some emotional reciprocity and so on. Question: does it make a big difference if the person is diagnosed since childhood or completely undiagnosed or not diagnosed? The answer is, if the child gets diagnosed in childhood, that's a beautiful thing, because with early diagnosis, there can be early interventions. With early interventions, this child can learn some social skills and emotional literacy from a very young age, when their brain is very moldable and like a sponge soaking up knowledge. And it is such a great thing, this early intervention business, that oftentimes when the little boy or little girl gets reassessed when they're young adulthood, 25 years old or so, they don't meet enough of the criteria to even have the diagnosis anymore. I'm not saying that there's a cure or a fix, but I'm just saying that with early intervention, your traits will be so minimal at age 22 to 28, somewhere in there, that you won't even meet enough of the diagnostic criteria to get the label. Question: how can I distinguish ASD1 from covert narcissism? Well, the person on the autism spectrum appears to be selfish and egotistical due to mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, and so on. The narcissist appears to be egotistical and selfish because he is. He is trying to manipulate others, control others, use others for his own gain. So the behavior looks the same, but the motivation behind there is completely different. With respect to the feeling criticized piece, wordage is king. Wordage is king. His self-esteem is already in the toilet. It doesn't take much for him to feel criticized. Sometimes your neutral comments download to him as criticism. You're not necessarily being critical or doing anything wrong, but he's going to download it in a certain way because he's hypersensitive. So the suggestions would be with respect to wording, and the whole reason I'm bringing up the business of wording is king is because if you pick your wording carefully, you won't feel as criticized. Some NT wives go, well, this seems like this is work for me. This is like more work for me. If you will stop doing some of the stuff you've been doing that hasn't been working and start doing some of these things that we talk about in the group, you probably will cut your workload by 80%. Oh, the other thing that's important too, almost as important as wording, is timing. So let me back up and say wording and timing is king. So some questions to ask with respect to timing. Is this something I want to address now, or is this potentially a bad moment? For example, he just got home from work and you don't know what his mood is. With respect to wordage, I would use I statements and we statements and basically never use you. Well, you. I can do that. It takes practice. It takes practice, and I can give examples if you need. But when you're delivering your message, use I and we. I would totally avoid you. Well, you did this, or you should have done. I know, seems ridiculous. Just the word you can be enough in some cases to trigger him. I would also be sure to be very careful to focus on the situation and not his behavior. Stay focused on the problem in question, not how he's handling the problem in question. And as you're delivering your message, I would strongly avoid asking questions. Just make it a needs statement. It would be helpful to me if blah, 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 because ding, 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 ding. I'd appreciate that. Because as soon as you start asking questions, he's going to feel interrogated. Even though you may feel, well, that's a fairly harmless question. And even if a neutral third party was observing the conversation, that third party might I have no idea how he downloaded that as interrogating, but he will. So some
fight starters would be, why are you still at the office? Or why am I the only one helping the kids with their homework? Or you bought all these groceries, but you didn't pick the one thing I sent you there for. I could come up with them all day long, believe me. So be careful with the questions. So in summary, if you can keep his anxiety reduced, you're never going to eliminate it. And if you can be careful with your wording and timing with respect to your message delivery, you will cut your workload greatly and you will cut your grief greatly. Your apologies at this point, I'm guessing, Charles, are worthless. Because if you apologize every time, but there's no behavior change, not only is the apologizing worthless, but she almost views it as insulting. Like you're just trying to smooth things over, sweep it under the rug, and you expect me to be okay with it. Your apologies are meaningless and insulting at this point. So to all the guys in here, if you find yourself apologizing over and over and over again, stop apologizing. It's not working. It's going to download to her as you're just trying to get off the hook. So instead, script time, use this script. It wasn't my intention to be hurtful, but I see it was hurtful anyway. Is there anything I can do to help? That's not an apology per se, but it is recognizing that even though this wasn't your intention, she still downloaded it as hurtful, and you're asking if there's any kind of reparative stuff that you can be doing. So if you've been apologizing all the time, but your apologies now are worthless, and she's even downloading that as you're just trying to get off the hook, stop apologizing and instead say, wasn't my intent to hurt. I see it hurts you anyway. What can I do to help? A cognitive behavioral therapist that wants to come up with both a prevention plan and an intervention plan. That's three things. Cognitive behavioral therapist that will help you come up with a plan to prevent certain things, and the things that can't be prevented to intervene in the middle of those things. Strategies, not talk. Talk is great for NTs. I would say for the NT to go to a therapist by herself and to just talk the entire hour, that would be good for her. She drags your ass along, and now the three of you are sitting in there and she's hogs all the airtime. You're going to be off in no man's land at about the 5-minute mark. You won't even be there mentally. Yeah. You're going to feel like you're on trial. Let's go. Hey, Matt, let's me and you go and talk to this therapist about how much shit you've been doing wrong. You're going to feel like you're on the witness stand, or you're going to feel like you're on trial and being interrogated. I have a ton of structure. My structure is, you present me with the problem that you want to address, and I'm going to provide you with some suggestions. That's my structure in these groups. What's the problem? Give me the summary of the problem. I've said that to the NT Wives and the NT Wives group about 5,000 times. Give me the summary of the problem. I don't need a huge backstory. And then I'm going to spend an equal amount of time, if not more time, providing some suggestions for prevention and intervention. And I interrupt a lot because when clients are talking to me, almost every sentence, there's something to address. If there's a paragraph with 10 sentences in it, in my mind, that's 10 bullet points, each of which needs to be addressed before we move on, because as the person is talking, there's stepping stones in each sentence. And if I let them go on for too long, I interrupt a lot, especially in the NT Wives group. If we go too long, we've kind of skipped over a bunch of stuff. And we can't get down here to number 10 issue because she rattled off issues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. So I have to stop her quickly and say, okay, wait, before we move on, let's look at that one, because that one ties into the next one. And plus, guys on the autism spectrum, they thrive on structure and routine. They're not improvisational. They don't like to go in here willy-nilly and just, well, I don't know, let's just wing it. That's not their style. With respect to the feeling criticized piece, wordage is king. Wordage is king. His self-esteem is already in the toilet. It doesn't take much for him to feel criticized. Sometimes your neutral comments download to him as criticism. You're not necessarily being critical or doing anything wrong, but he's going to download it in a certain way because he's hypersensitive. So the suggestions would be with respect to wording, and the whole reason I'm bringing up the business of wording is king is because if you pick your wording carefully, you won't feel as criticized. Some NT wives go, well, this seems like it's all this work for me. This is like more work for me. If you will stop doing some of the stuff you've been doing that hasn't been working and start doing some of these things that we talk about in the group, you probably will cut your workload by 80%. Oh, the other thing that's important too, almost as important as wording, is timing. So let me back up and say wording and timing is king. So some questions to ask with respect to timing. Is this something I want to address now, or is this potentially a bad moment? For example, he just got home from work and you don't know what his mood is. With respect to wordage, I would use I statements and we statements and basically never use you. Well, you. I can do that. It takes practice. It takes practice, and I can give examples if you need. But when you're delivering your message, use I and we. I would totally avoid you. Well, you did this, or you should have done. I know, seems ridiculous. Just the word you can be enough in some cases to trigger him. I would also be sure to be very careful to focus on the situation and not his behavior. Stay focused on the problem in question, not how he's handling the problem in question. And as you're delivering your message, I would strongly avoid asking questions. Just make it a needs statement. It would be helpful to me if blah, 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 because ding, 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 ding. I'd appreciate that. Because as soon as you start asking questions, he's going to feel interrogated. Even though you may feel, well, that's a fairly harmless question. And even if a neutral third party was observing the conversation, that third party might, I have no idea how he downloaded that as interrogating, but he will. So some fight starters would be, why are you still at the office? Or why am I the only one helping the kids with their homework? Or you bought all these groceries, but you didn't pick the one thing I sent you there for. I could come up with them all day long, believe me. So be careful with the questions. So in summary, if you can keep his anxiety reduced, you're never going to eliminate it. And if you can be careful with your wording and timing with respect to your message delivery, you will cut your workload greatly and you will cut your grief greatly.
Hey, quick message to neurotypical spouses who are married to someone with ASD level 1. You have often wanted your autistic spouse to change, haven't you? You wanted them to be more neurotypical? But has your autistic spouse ever done the same thing to you? Has he or she ever wanted you to be more autistic and exhibit some traits of autism? I don't think so. How do you know whether your ASD spouse had just an adult temper tantrum or a meltdown? Well, if he remembers what he said and did, it was an adult temper tantrum. If he doesn't remember what he said or did, it was a meltdown. Got a question from a neurotypical wife, and she states that my husband has ASD level 1 and he has some emotions blindness or alexithymia. Can he feel love? The answer is yes. It's going to be harder for him to find the words to describe how he feels, and it's going to be easier for people with ASD to show love through actions, in other words, doing things for you. But alexithymia, even though it effectively isolates a person with ASD emotionally, it does not prevent him from feeling and showing love. Did you guys know that all cats have autism? Yeah, all of them. Especially these two. That's Watson and Simon up there. Okay, this is another ASD spouse alert. The next time you're home with your wife and she's doing dishes, walk up behind her and massage her shoulders for about 5 or 10 seconds. Yeah, deep tissue massage, right here. Oh yeah, get it done. The only request I have of my neurodiverse couples out there is please don't fight on the same day. In other words, one of you can fight on Sunday, the other one on Monday, then back and forth like that. So as long as one of you is sane, both of you will be okay. Hey guys, this is Mark, and a quick message to men on the autism spectrum. If you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some degree of mind blindness. And sometimes what ends up happening with that is you think you're smarter than everybody else. But other people see that and they go, he thinks he's smarter than everybody else. And that makes you look dumb. Okay? But other people can see that and you don't see that you're not the smartest person. It's like having spaghetti sauce all over your lip here and you're talking to people, acting like everything's normal, don't even know what's going on, and other people are looking at you like, this guy doesn't even realize he has spaghetti sauce all over dripping down his chin. And so if you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some mind blindness, and you may be thinking, and you may have thought for a long time, I'm smarter than anybody else. Other people can see that you think you're smarter than everybody else, and they don't agree, and again, that makes you look dumb. Quick message to the neurotypical wives out there. If you had an emotionally unavailable father or an emotionally abusive father, it's very possible that your ASD level 1 husband is paying for the sins of that father, and the two of you don't even know that that's going on. So one thing that comes up a lot from the NT wife is she thinks her husband has pathological demand avoidance, or PDA. Well, first of all, PDA is not recognized as a disorder. It's not in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. And secondarily, even though it looks like he's ignoring or avoiding anything that he perceives as a demand, what's really going on is that when the NT wife demands something and he seems to ignore it or avoid doing it, it's not that he just doesn't give a shit and says, screw you, I'm not interested in meeting your needs. He's not purposely trying to be oppositional or defiant. What's going on here is these, quote, demands, unquote, fall way outside of his special interest, or he doesn't view it as something that even needs to be done at all. So does it look like he's ignoring or avoiding anything that he perceives as a demand? Yes, it looks like that. But the motive here is not to be purposefully oppositional or defiant or disrespectful or uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, and so on. Another reason for lack of follow-through is often his anxiety. And so if you are requesting or demanding his participation in something that's going to raise his anxiety, then he's likely to want to avoid that. And that's often manifested in the form of a shutdown. But here again, the motive is not to be dismissive or to reject you or to be insensitive to your needs. The motive is, in this case, to remove himself from the source of anxiety and decompress. And so if you want your autistic spouse to start paying attention to your demands or requests, and you want him to start following through, then you need to get his buy-in up front. You need to appeal to his logic, and you need to come up with the facts that support why it's a good idea to follow through with this thing that you want him to follow through with. Many adults with ASD do marry and have kids. Marriage often follows a period of ideal courtship. However, the experience of the NT spouse and even the children is quite different compared to what most spouses would experience and expect. Neurotypical spouses often have an awareness early in the marriage that something is not right, but they can't work out what. They often speak of being aware that something like a piece of a puzzle is missing. With respect to parenting, parents with ASD may not be aware of or anticipate situations of danger or neglect when caring for a child. They may have trouble reading their child's needs or emotional state and may either respond inappropriately or not at all, leading to the possibility of neglect or mishandling. If you're married to somebody with autism, you're married to somebody who has a disorder. Yes, it's a disorder. It's not a condition or a different way of thinking, okay? If you had a child with a disorder, would you treat that child the same way you do your autistic spouse? Huh? Would you? So there are 6 main reasons why people with ASD have such high anxiety. Number 1, limitations in generalizing from one situation to another often contributes to repeating the same social gaffes. Number 2, limitations in their ability to grasp social cues and their highly rigid style act in concert to create repeated social errors. Number 3, many experience the discomfort that comes from somatic or bodily responses that are disconnected from events and experience. Number 4, the lack of empathy severely limits skills for autonomous social problem solving. Number 5, the social challenges of ASD make it difficult for people with the disorder to develop coping strategies for soothing themselves and containing difficult emotions. And number 6, there is sufficient grasp of situations to recognize that others get it when they do not.
One might be emotional reasoning. This is where the person makes decisions and arguments based on how he feels rather than objective reality. I'm a big believer in using emotions as your gauge, but you need to use emotions as your gauge in combination with rational thought. So in the event that the ASD guy is totally operating on logic, that's dangerous. And you have run into many cases where your NT wife operates totally on emotions, that's equally as dangerous. So one of the things that I do when I start using emotional reasoning, because it feels this way, therefore it is this way, I go, wait a minute, no. What's the logic behind there? What's the reality that's going on? And I do this daily. I will do this daily in the moment when I'm starting to let my emotions dominate, or I'm operating on 99% emotions, 1% logic. I quickly go back and go, okay, what's really going on here? And what I do is I try to put myself in the other person's shoes and look at it from their angle. And when I do that, I realize, okay, I probably was making too much out of this. That's one of my favorite self-talk phrases right there. I'm probably making too much out of this. Another favorite phrase of mine, a go-to phrase when I'm trying to erase the distortion is, I think I'll just mind my own business instead of trying to predict other people's motives. That's a big one with me too.
Your wife is probably no doubt an intuition expert.
Mm-hmm.
And she can read your facial cues, even though you may think you might not be divulging anything with the nonverbal language facially. But she will read one eyebrow that's raised a little weird, or a little voice inflection has changed because she can tell that you're upset. You don't have to do much in the way of body language or voice inflection. If it's different than the normal, which she knows what normal is, and you don't have to reveal much information because she can pick it up in the wind. With mind blindness, that ability is severely compromised, where it's hard for me to imagine what another person might be thinking or feeling. To oversimplify it, although this captures it well, it's a problem with imagination. She can watch a movie unfold, and let's say it's a romantic movie, and she will be able to predict or imagine the outcome based on limited information. That's why I tell these NT ladies they have to be concrete. He doesn't have the intuition and ability to peel himself out of his skin, crawl into your skin, and look out of your eyeballs and know what you're thinking and why you're thinking that way, and totally understand why you would have a particular opinion or perspective on something. He doesn't have that level of talent like you do, the NT wife.
Okay, let's talk about the hidden work of masking. We're going to begin with something many neurotypical wives never see, which is the amount of cognitive effort required for autistic adults to navigate social expectations. Now, for many neurotypical people, social behavior is largely automatic. Eye contact, tone of voice, facial expressions, knowing when to ask follow-up questions, reading emotional shifts in the partner. These processes happen largely outside conscious awareness. But for autistic adults, these behaviors require active neurological management. Instead of running automatically, the autistic brain must manually calculate them. Imagine driving a car where every movement required conscious attention. You need to think about your foot on the pedal, checking the mirror, turning the wheel, maintaining your lane. Now imagine doing that same thing for hours every day. That's similar to what autistic people experience when they mask. Masking means intentionally performing neurotypical behaviors to reduce social friction. For example, forcing eye contact, suppressing stimming behaviors, monitoring tone of voice, rehearsing conversational responses, remembering emotional scripts, carefully analyzing facial expressions. This work is heavily managed by the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain region responsible for executive control and behavioral regulation. And the prefrontal cortex has limited endurance. It can compensate for neurological differences, but not for very long. Now let's talk about why money is not just money. In most relationships, money carries emotional meaning. But in neurodiverse relationships, money often carries neurological meaning. For many people on the autism spectrum, financial decisions are processed through several systems simultaneously: executive function, threat detection, cognitive predictability, sensory load. And that combination changes the experience of spending. To the neurotypical spouse, a gift often means, "Hey, I thought of you." To the autistic spouse, that same event may register as an unexpected variable has just entered the system. And when the brain detects unpredictability, it often shifts into protective mode. That protection can look like this: resistance to spending, rigid budgeting rules, discomfort with gifts, anxiety about waste, emotional shutdown during financial conversations. That's not about selfishness. It's about maintaining neurological stability. For most neurodiverse couples, conventional marriage counseling doesn't just fail. It can actually make the relationship worse. Not because the couple isn't trying, not because there isn't love, but because traditional counseling models were never designed for neurodiverse nervous systems. The I feel statements and love languages, you might as well speak Russian. Have you ever experienced a relationship that started with intense attention, deep conversation, and almost magnetic focus, only to feel like something shifted months later? Now, in neurodiverse relationships, especially when one person is autistic, this pattern can be confusing and even painful. At the beginning, the connection can feel extraordinary. The autistic partner may message constantly, want to spend long hours together, ask endless questions, and show a level of fascination that feels incredibly validating. Many neurotypical partners describe the experience this way: man, in the early going, I felt like the most interesting person in the world. But then something happens. The intensity softens, the constant messages slow down, the emotional energy changes, and the question starts forming in the neurotypical partner's mind: was that really love or just a temporary hyperfocus? Well, maybe you've experienced moments like this where, you're clearly upset, but he just simply doesn't notice. Or maybe you try to explain how something hurt and he responds logically instead of emotionally. Maybe you're hoping for some moral comfort in your weak moments, and instead you get silence or problem solving from him. And in those moments, it can feel incredibly painful because it's not like he sees you're upset and chooses not to do anything about it. He doesn't see it to begin with. So it can feel like the person who should understand you the most is somehow missing the very thing that matters to you most.
If I have some executive function deficits, I'm not going to totally understand her sarcasm. I'm not going to be able to be a good reader of her facial cues, her body language, her tone of voice, her volume of voice, and so on. So if I have an abstract thinking deficit, I'm not going to understand language unless it's very literal and concrete. With abstract thinking deficit, I'm going to take things very literally. I'm not going to if she is even remotely vague in describing what she wants, it's going to be hard for me to understand. If I have an emotional control deficit, which is emotional control is an executive function, but if I have a deficit in that area, I'm going to have difficulty controlling my escalating emotions. We call that emotional dysregulation. So if I tend to revert to some form of a shutdown or a meltdown, that is an emotional control deficit. Planning and organizing is an executive function. If we have a deficit in that area, then I have a difficulty organizing my time, organizing information, carrying out instructions. How does that cause a problem in the relationship? The ASD individual is usually a visual learner in a verbal world. So if she is giving me verbal instructions, I'm really going to have a hard time understanding and carrying out those instructions accurately. Shifting focus, if I have a deficit in that area, it's going to be hard for me to stop what I'm doing, especially if it's one of my special interests and I'm highly focused on it in the moment, to drop that and shift completely to attend to something that she wants me to tend to. Even if she just interrupts what I'm doing and wants to engage in a conversation all of a sudden, especially if, I need to talk to you about this problem. It's like, okay, well, thanks for the big surprise and disrupting my routine type of thing. And then the other deficit that is very prominent in ASD is working memory. So if I have a working memory deficit, it's hard for me to remember what she said, especially if it was too many points that droned on for 15 or 20 minutes. So how this is going to cause a problem in the relationship is when she is upset with me, but she doesn't come right out and tell me, she expects me to know it anyway. But if I don't get it, if I don't understand that she's upset because she's not being direct and concrete with me and being very specific, then somehow I'm insensitive, uncaring because I'm not noticing that she's upset. I want to make sure you understand the difference between a meltdown and a shutdown. With a true meltdown, your prefrontal cortex is shutting down and your amygdala, the fight or flight response of the brain, is now on front stage, and it's flooding you with adrenaline and cortisol, fight or flight chemicals. And with a true meltdown, let's assume it's in the context of her trying to talk to you, especially about a heavyweight topic while she's angry, you are only going to be able to. You won't be able to will yourself into a different state of mind. You will only be able to listen to maybe 8% of what she's saying and only understand 60% of that and only retain 40% of that and maybe only follow through with 20% of what she's asking. So in a full-blown meltdown moment, she is wasting her time and energy with you. That's why we need to have the conversation about prevention, because intervening in the middle of a meltdown, that bullet's already left the gun. That storm is going to have to ride itself out. So when we're talking about meltdowns, we have to think in terms of prevention. What is a shutdown? That is simply his catching it early that he's escalating towards a meltdown, and he leaves to prevent a meltdown.
So I got an email from a husband with ASD level 1, and he was saying that I talk about how social skills can be taught. And so his question is, well, exactly how does one go about learning social skills? Well, you're going to need some outside assistance, a seeing eye dog, so to speak, and that could be a social skills coach, could be a life coach, job coach, an accountability partner, and in some cases, if your NT wife is willing to do so, she could be a compassionate coach from time to time. So let's pick a social skill to use as an example. Let's say, for example, you're not really great at give and take in conversation, and you interrupt your NT wife as she is talking. You have a thought, and you just dive in and step on her tongue and throw your thought in the mix, or maybe offer advice that's not necessarily wanted or needed. And so she gets the impression that you're more interested in talking about your viewpoint than listening to her viewpoint. So this is one of these hidden social rules where you don't interrupt the speaker. You kind of wait until the other person pauses, and then you interject. The first phase of learning a social skill would be unconscious incompetence. And so to use the example of give and take in conversation, you interject or interrupt, and you're not aware that you're doing it. You don't know what you don't know. And so you violate this hidden social rule repeatedly, and you're unaware. Now let's say that the two of you have agreed that she's going to cue you in a very tactful manner to let you know when you interrupt, and you're okay with that. You're not going to download that as criticism. So she's talking, you do what you usually do and interrupt, and then she goes, remember when we said I was going to point out to you when you interrupt? He says, yeah. Okay, well, there was an interruption right there. And so now she is cueing you to the interruptions. And now this is the second phase of learning a social skill, which is conscious incompetence. What I mean by that, you still haven't cultivated that social skill yet, but now you're becoming aware of it by virtue of her cueing. Okay? So now the next phase would be conscious competence. And this is where you're beginning to develop the habit of not interrupting. She speaks. You're fully aware that your tendency is to interrupt, but you're not interrupting. You're waiting for the pause, and then you come in and put your 2 cents in, or provide her with some feedback on what she just said. So you're consciously aware that you are no longer violating this hidden social rule of don't interrupt the speaker. Then the fourth and final phase of learning a social skill is called unconscious competence. In this fourth and final phase, you have fully developed the new habit of give and take in conversation. You take some conversation from her, then you give some conversation back. You take some from her, you give some back. It's a ping pong effect now, rather than you dominating the conversation or interrupting the flow. And you're not even aware that you are doing it right. It's become an unconscious habit now. It's running on autopilot. And so that is the fourth and final phase, which is unconscious competence. So we go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. And we got there because you had, in this example, you got a cue from your NT wife that you were interrupting. You made a behavior change, and the reward is Now you have developed a new social skill. And those are three important factors there we're going to talk about now. Cue, behavior change, and reward. Except we'll use a different example here. I'm going to borrow one from one of my clients. He was accused of being a workaholic, and he admits that he was. And so he would work late at the office, and he would get home after the family had already eaten dinner. And so his wife was complaining that he wasn't spending enough time in the evenings with the family. And so what he did was he set up his own cue. In this case, he put a timer on the lights in his office, and at 5 o'clock, the lights shut off. And he took 3 to 5 minutes to tie up any loose ends and wrap it up, and he left. So the lights shutting off right at 5 o'clock was the cue. The behavior change was he packed up and left and went home and spent time with his family and actually ate dinner with his family. And so that was the behavior change. And then the reward was happy wife, happy life. In other words, she felt better about the relationship because she didn't feel like work was more important to him than she was. And the reward was less tension in the marriage. And it was a big reward according to him. So that was a long way around the bush to illustrate one way to learn social skills. But bear in mind, you will need some outside assistance. This is not something that you can necessarily do on your own. I'm sure it's happened before where guys have done it on their own, but that's taking the very, very long road. So best to recruit the assistance from somebody else who would be very eager to help. One final note, guys, the important point here is consistency. Practice, 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 practice. Because you want to develop a new habit that runs on autopilot. And the only way you're going to get there is chronic, emphasis on chronic practicing. Now, practice may not necessarily mean perfect. That's okay. We're not shooting for perfection. But practice will definitely make permanent. In other words, you may still interrupt the speaker from time to time. That's okay. But if you're not doing that 80% of the time now, rather than only 10%, and you're consistently doing that over time, that's permanent. So we're not shooting for perfection, but practice does make permanent.
Her resentment is not your problem. You can't make her mad, sad, glad. You can't make her spit. You can't make her stand on her head. You can't make her forgive you. You can't make her let go of resentment. She chose, I hope she's listening, she chose resentment. You didn't make her feel resentment. She chose it. Her resentment is her responsibility. That goes into the filing cabinet called I don't have any control over that. You have control of your behavior, and you're here. You're making a good faith effort to shift gears from this point forward. You have control of that. But her resentment, she has a laundry list of problems that she has with you, and she's ruminated over all these problems, and she's probably accused you of being a narcissist and so on. She has fed her own resentment. And if she holds on to bitterness and resentment, that doesn't hurt you. She might be in the other room thinking how pissed off she is about you. You don't even know what she's thinking. Her resentment only hurts her. It's her feeling, not yours. You can't make her stop being resentful. Now, if you follow the suggestions that we're learning in this group, there might be a happy organic consequence that her resentment level loosens up a little bit. But you're not doing this to reduce her resentment. You're doing this for you. You're doing this to reduce your relationship anxiety so that you can be a better team player in this marriage. This is all about you advocating for you, you doing strategies for you. And yes, there will probably be, and hopefully will be, some secondary benefit for her, of course. But that resentment thing, that's her problem. You can't make her feel any particular way. If you are operating like you usually operate in the heat of the moment, you are already by default operating under the old brain. So I have used the term many times. We'll use meltdowns as the example. You can't think in terms of intervention with a meltdown. which, by the way, is the amygdala on steroids. We have to think in terms of prevention. Now, I understand that sometimes things have to be dealt with right now, and in those cases, you're just simply going to have to tough it out as best you can. The other 98% of the time, when you are feeling heat, we said heat of the moment. It's no longer just a moment. There's now heat. When you're feeling heat in the moment, you are under the old brain by default. And it would be best to think in terms of prevention, because there's no way for me to intervene in this moment. If I'm experiencing the heat of the moment, I'm not going to be able to instantly move myself from old brain to new brain. Not going to happen. So I have to think in terms of prevention, which is, let's use an example with the wife. I'm going to have this conversation. She's upset about something. She sent me a text. We're going to have the discussion tonight. I know for a fact that I'm going to probably go into this operating mostly under the old brain, and I'm going to have to let her know when that happens. And I'm going to say, I do want to discuss this, but right now I can already tell that I'm not in a mental state to discuss this in a way that's going to yield any kind of problem solving. Mental state being I'm not in my prefrontal cortex right now. This is a stretch, and some NTs aren't up for this. Can we treat this a little bit like a business meeting where perhaps you write down some of your thoughts and let me look at those, and then I will write down some of my responses to those. And this does make longer work, but it also gets you removed from the old brain, because now she is talking to you on a piece of paper instead of face to face, where her words are hitting you in the forehead like darts, and she's staring at you, and that look is going right through your eyes and drilling 2 holes in the back of your head. So this is a longer route to problem solve, but with the other way, you don't problem solve. We're removing the heat. We're even removing the moment. This is important to you, therefore it's important to me. I want to get the full message. Could you please write down the main points and when you're done, give it to me. I will go over here and look at it and ruminate through them and come back with a response. Give me some time to ruminate over this. And while you're over there dealing with that, now your prefrontal cortex is in charge. And I understand some things are emergent. Wouldn't be able to do this some of the time, but the times that you would not be able to do this would be just 2-3% of the time. Some things are emergent, and she's not going to write it out. And some ENT wives say, I'm not writing anything out. You stand there and take it like a man, in which case I would say, leave. Unless you're a masochist and want to just sit there and take it to prove something to yourself. You're not going to get anything accomplished. Why punish yourself? That's not self-soothing. We just discussed in this session today. We're looking for self-soothing. We're shooting for the parasympathetic mode. If she said, no, I want you to sit there and sweat. I don't think so. I don't think so. See you later. Bye. Write it out. Your main points. We will talk. If you expect me to sit here and try to problem solve when my amygdala has flooded me with cortisol and adrenaline, no. Instead of punishing myself by this conversation, I'm going to self-soothe myself by removing myself from this conversation. And there is something to be said that sometimes she just has to have an emotional vomit to feel better. But I got a real problem with that, because that's like me asking you, okay, sometimes she's going to be verbally abusive and you just kind of just go ahead and be tied to the whipping post for a little while, because she'll feel better. Fuck that. We're interested in being able to stay in parasympathetic mode so that our new brain is working, so that we are rational and logical, so that we can problem solve, which will benefit her. We care about solving the relationship problems, but it ain't going to happen unless we do it this way. So if she's more concerned with just having an emotional vomit in your lap than problem solving, you have a choice. Okay, I think she probably needs to vent. I'm going to be over here in a heightened state of anxiety, and I have no clue what to do about it, but I'll just go ahead and let her spit all over me. Or I'm going to start treating myself better. I will problem solve when you calm down, and we may have to make a few accommodations, but my big goal is to solve the problem. Instead of letting the problem linger and linger and linger, and your resentment getting deeper and deeper and deeper, which is what we've been doing for the previous 10, 15 years. Now she has a choice. She can choose to be a bully and get nothing accomplished other than you doing a shutdown or a meltdown. Or she can go, okay, well, I'm up for trying anything to solve some of the problems because they're piling up over there in the closet and we're running out of closet space.
Why don't you understand my feelings?
Can you put them on a spreadsheet?
Hey, what's for dinner?
Hi, honey. I'm home, and we need to talk.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
We are gathered here today to join this man and woman in holy matrimony. I pronounce thee man and wife.
I feel so lonely.
Okay, well then I'll make you a peanut butter sandwich.
I wish you would just listen to me. Yes.
Did you know gas prices have decreased by 32%?
Can we be more spontaneous? Yes.
Can we schedule that? I'm busy right now.
Please bring me some water and an aspirin.
Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.